Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Cam, and welcome back to the Road to Creed 3. This is the series where I will be covering every Rocky movie and every Creed movie in honor of Creed 3 coming in just a couple of weeks now. I've covered Rockies 1 through 5. The playlist link will be in the link in the eye in the right-hand corner. Go check that out if you are so inclined. But now we have gotten to Rocky Balboa. We have gotten to Rocky 6. It took 16 years after Rocky 5, but we finally got the ending that Rocky Balboa truly deserved. But before we go into the movie, I have to introduce my guest for this review. He is one of my best friends, and he has a great YouTube channel called Phil Talks Sports. Phil Nunziata. Phil, how you doing?
Doing good, Jake. It's surprising that it took this long for me to make a cameo on your channel, but I'm very happy to be here. You've made several appearances on the vlogs I've done on the various wrestling shows we've went to, so I'm glad I can finally return the favor here and talk about one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah, and the channel went on a bit of a forced hiatus because of Hurricane Ian, the SOB, but
Yeah.
but you're back up and running because, well, we've got a little thing called the Super Bowl coming up.
We do, and I was lucky enough to have my team in it this year, so that's where a lot of my attention is going. And being the Eagles fan that I am, you really can't mention the Eagles without talking about Rocky, so it all comes back together.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad that we're recording this on Thursday the 9th, because I'm sure you'll be radio silent by the time, because like I've known Phil for years. He's like the biggest Eagles fan that I know. I was asking him like, "Hey, you gonna do like a party for the Super Bowl?" And he's like, "Ain't no way." He's just
No,
gonna
I have to be by myself for this, just out of the for the safety of everybody else involved. I have to sweat this out on my own.
well, well, I'll be pulling for the Eagles. Just maybe you get a tattoo on the other leg.
Yeah, so I've thought about I don't want to jinx it, but I've thought it maybe I just add the years underneath it or the Roman numerals for it, but I try not to think about it too much cuz I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but that is a thought that I've had.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, enough about that. I'll put Phil's channel linked in the description. Go give him a subscribe there.
appreciate
And
it.
let's get into Rocky Balboa. This was released in 2006, written and directed by Sly, and it sees the return of Sly as well as Burt Young, with new debuting cast members including Antonio Tarver. And it picks up Rocky, officially retired now. The whole brain damage thing was retcon, but long story short, he is now living a much quieter life. Adrian passed away due to breast cancer, some kind of cancer, and he is running an Italian restaurant, and it seems like he's content with this in his life. But then, in a case of blood feuds starting over much less, I guess, in a video game simulation, Rocky beats the current heavyweight champion, Mason the Line Dixon, played by Antonio Tarver. Tarver takes this about as well as you might expect and challenges Rocky to one more match. And despite Rocky being in his 60s by this point, he says yes. And then we have Rocky 6. So Phil, before we go into the meat and potatoes, what do you remember? Like, did you see this movie in theaters? What's your fondest memory of this?
I remember like a lot of people when this first, we got the news that we were getting a sixth Rocky, not called Rocky 6. We kind of had the opinion of what is the point of this? It was so many years after the fact. You probably covered this in your last video where Rocky 5 left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. So I was a little happy that, okay, we got a second chance at this. The title threw everybody off. But I was generally just curious where they're going to go because you assume with all this time passed, like Rocky's not still going to be fighting. So where's it going to go? I think based on some of the storylines in Rocky 5, maybe his son's going to be fighting or something. I remember that was a rumor for a long time, but just generally curiosity. I don't believe I saw it in theaters. I think it kind of got away from me, but I remember seeing it shortly after when it went out on probably Redbox at this point. I don't think it was quite Blockbuster. I think Blockbuster was dead by then, but it was probably a Redbox one for me.
If For my younger viewers, Redbox is this thing at gas stations where you go and you put your money in and it spits out a DVD. It's like Netflix, but a lot less convenient.
And it never has the movie you want. That's the other gimmick with Redbox.
That is for sure. But I remember my dad and my mom and I going to see this at the movie theater that is no longer a movie theater. It's an MMA gym. It's the Rest in Peace to the Regal Port Orange Pavilion 6. But I remember seeing that, and I had never seen a Rocky movie by that point. So I was going into this movie completely blind. And I remember loving it. And now that I've seen the first Rocky several times and I've reviewed every one of them. I don't know how hot of a take this is going to be. I think this is subtly one of the best Rocky movies ever.
Well, you asked me, you told me you were going to review all of them leading up to Creed 3, which I thought was an awesome idea. And you asked me, would you want to review one of them? And you said, I think the first Rocky was taken, but I kind of had my pick of all the others. And I specifically said to you, I want to do Rocky Balboa because it's one of my favorites, but I think that's not a generally shared thing. So I think we agree with that. But like, it's pretty underrated about how great it actually is. So like, that was my reason for wanting to be on here. I would have done them all with you if you asked, but if I got to pick one, this was the one because I thought it's very unique. It's a completely different story. I'll probably touch on my take on this movie is it's become more realistic as time's gone on, in my opinion. I can elaborate on that later, but it's just one of those, the other ones got into mundane. It was almost like Godzilla movies where like the new creature pops up and Godzilla's got to fight it, and maybe he wins and maybe he doesn't. And that's kind of what happens with Rocky Balboa. They just have these larger than life villains that he eventually has to take down while dealing with, personal life. This one's more 90% personal life, and there happens to be a fight at the end of it.
Exactly. And I think this is comfortably in the conversation for best sixth movie of all time. We could count Return of the Jedi if you really want to get down to the numbers of it all.
I am nowhere near qualified to talk Star Wars, so I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, well, that's another story for another time. But as far as Rocky goes, like you said, the fifth one, I remember just when that ended, I was like, thank God. Because I went into it with the most open mind possible, and I just was not a fan. But then just rewatching clips of this for this review, it's like night and day. And it's
Mm-hmm.
from the same writer and director, Sylvester Stallone. And even he later said, yeah, the fifth was horrible. So this was him pulling a bit of a redemption arc, if you will.
You might think because after like I think if you polled 100 people, like 90 of them, their favorite Rocky is going to be 3 or 4 because of how iconic the rivals, between Mr. T and Drago, how like iconic they were. So like there was really nowhere to go but down for the fifth one. So we said, why not try? Well, why even try? Just throw it off the cliff because it's only going to go down from there. So I think he was put in a tough spot to make a fifth one. And I think at some point somebody must have asked the question, what if we just took the boxing out of a boxing movie? That's essentially what we got as far as Rocky's concerned. His biggest fight is just a back alley brawl. And it's funny you can't talk about Rocky Balboa without talking about Rocky 5 because really this is a redemption story for the series and a little bit for the character itself.
Without a doubt. And it's interesting because even though it is a bit of a redemption, there's a lot of things that call back to previous movies. Like the biggest one is the Marie character, who was in the first one and is
Right.
now a main character in this one. And not gonna lie, I definitely missed Adrian in this one. From what I researched, it was very much a mutual thing for her to be written out, which I mean, I can't argue with that. But
Sure.
the Marie character, I'm glad they didn't go in like oh, she's the new Mrs. Balboa now. Like they're
Yeah, that would
just
have been a little age difference, a little too hard to ignore on that one.
exactly, they're just friends. And Rocky, because he's the best, he just tries to help her out any way that he can because she has a son and it's a whole big thing. It was an out of wedlock thing. So he is trying his best to help her any way that he can, which I like. I like the spirit of that. And speaking of sons, what do you think of his relationship with Rocky's son? I believe he's called Robert.
I thought it was interesting. I think it's something that as you grow older, you understand more. I think when you're a little kid watching this movie, maybe even a teenager, you're like, your dad is Rocky. Why would you not want to just be around Rocky all the time? And he kind of has this story arc of like, I can't go anywhere because of my last name. So I have to carve out my own little slice of life here. And he's in, I don't know if it's ever fully mentioned, but he's in just your generic corporate world trying to climb the corporate ladder, which is the complete opposite of what Rocky does. And I don't know that he particularly enjoys it, but he knows it's an avenue of life that he can make for himself. So really, his arc is just about being his own man. It's really something I wish they could have explored a little more in another movie or in five, because five was such a waste of time. Obviously, he's a little younger at that point. But it's really, I think it's just a story of getting out of his dad's shadow, a shadow that his dad never intended to cast and feels bad that it's there. But I think that's mostly his arc, and he's one of the more intriguing characters, I think, in the whole movie.
And a small moment, I don't know if you ever caught this, but a small moment when the video game fight happens, it cuts to a sports bar where Robert is there with some coworkers, and they're like, "Hey, it's Rocky Jr. It's
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
son," and he's
Mhm.
like, it's a small thing, but it is very noticeable that he's trying to not be Rocky Balboa Jr. He's just
Right.
trying to be Robert Balboa. That's all he's ever wanted to be.
And I think that's pretty easy to understand. Like whether it's some people have this with siblings, right? You have an older brother or sister that just like, oh, you're so and so's brother. That's something that happens to a lot of people. Same thing can happen with parents, and sometimes it only happens in a small avenue of life. But when you're a big star like Rocky, like you literally can't go to the bar with your friends without somebody bringing it up. So it's something that you could totally see why it would frustrate somebody over time, and something that eats away at you like that. Totally understandable.
What did you, and this is probably the reason why everyone has heard of this movie but never seen it. It's that speech where Rocky's like, where it's the whole "that's how winning is done" speech. If you've
Yeah.
ever been on Instagram for 5 minutes, you've probably run into it.
I have multiple times almost bought a canvas print of that entire speech, and the only reason I haven't is I can't find one big enough because I want it to take up like an entire wall because I love that speech. I think it's a top 10 like scene in cinema. I've always make the argument like there's movies and then there's cinema. This puts it in the cinema category. That speech, absolutely. And yeah, it's just one of those things. No matter how many times you hear it, even if you see it 3 times on Instagram in a day, you get the goosebumps still. Like it never really goes away.
Yeah, I joke, but I rewatched it for the sake of this review, and I got goosebumps all over again. And I've seen it a ton of times. It's still when he goes into when you were little, I used to hold you like this. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh God, it's happening. It's really like the feelings just cascade over me. And we like people like to make fun of Sly being like, "Ooh," like his voice and all that. This is probably one of the best scenes that he has ever done. Just no hesitation whatsoever.
I mean, the joke's always been there that everybody can do a Stallone impression, but Stallone can't do an impression of anybody. But I think what makes it so powerful, like if this happened in five when he was training Tommy Gunn, and the same speech was given to him in the corner, it'd be cool, but it wouldn't be the same thing. I think what makes it so powerful is it's all fight analogies, but it has nothing to do with boxing when he talks about it. It's totally about life, just using boxing as like his comparison, and that's what makes it. If it was just because every boxing movie has to have the cool cornerman speech, have just been another one. But the fact that this happens in an alley with his son makes it that much more powerful.
It also adds to the effect that Adrian is now passed. Paulie just lost his job, which we'll talk about Paulie in a minute. But
Mm.
just so much stuff has happened between 5 and 6 that whole speech just hits even more. And kind of a running theme in this series of mine has been my feelings on the Paulie character played by Burt Young, and this is the best that Burt Young ever did as Paulie. I am not a fan of this character. He's just not for me. I thought that he was a bully. Like even in 5, he was the guy that just pissed away all of Rocky's money on that real estate scam. Like
Right.
why was Rocky hanging out with the guy? But honestly, Burt Young did his best work as this character in this movie in multiple scenes.
I mean, as the character, he's a scumbag like 90% of the movie. But you'll appreciate this more than anybody, being the wrestling fan that you are like I am. If you hate the guy, he kind of did his job right. I don't think he was ever meant to be a likable character. And I will say my all-time favorite Paulie line is when he stumbles into Adrian's, the restaurant, and the hostess asks if he has a reservation. He says, "What do I look like, an Indian?" In his drunken stupor. I don't remember if that's this movie or the prior one, But yeah, that's an all-time Paulie line for me.
That is that is funny. I low-key kind of forgot that he said that.
It's probably not PC to quote anymore, but at the time we got away with it, I guess.
But yeah, my relationship with the Polly character has just always been it's been all over the place because I like the actor Burt Young. I thought he did a fantastic job. He was nominated for an Oscar for this role, so clearly he knows what he's doing. But I don't know, just some of the actions, I just sat there and just like rubbing my temples, sitting there like Rocky, just dump this loser, please.
And he's too loyal for that. Like even after all the money was gone, any like Rocky's life would inherently be better without him, but he's also, I think, his last connection to Adrian. That's another reason he would keep him around. Like he wouldn't have the heart, no matter what happened, to just kind of kick him to the curb.
Right. Well, what did you think about Mason the Line Dixon, which is a name that is just ridiculous?
All time great nickname. I think a lot of boxing or wrestling, whatever. There's a lot of prefix and suffix nicknames, but it takes a special one to be like in the middle there. Like Quentin Rampage Jackson is just really popular. The Walkout song by 3 6 Mafia. I don't know if you were going to touch on that. All time great song. It was written for the movie. I'll throw that little bit of trivia that I do know, but it took off after the movie even, and just a great character. I think it's pretty obvious it's loosely based on Floyd Mayweather, at least the general concept of the guy. And what I wanted to bring back was this whole happens because of a simulation fight, and at the time that seems ridiculous. That almost makes more sense now because we live in a time where the most popular people with boxing gloves are YouTubers and not actual fighters, and we also live in a world where Mike Tyson had a fight in the year 2022. So it's a little slightly less crazy to think that a 50-plus-year-old, almost 60-year-old person will get back in the ring for what was supposed to be a glorified exhibition, but obviously blew up to be more than that. If Mike Tyson next year did an exhibition fight with Floyd Mayweather, that seems ridiculous the year this movie came out. But if it happens now, it's just another Jake Paul show. So it's almost more easy to understand now than it was when this movie came out.
Without a doubt. And one of the things that I found in my research, this character was initially Stallone wanted Roy Jones Jr. to play this character, which I'm not
Oh,
super
interesting.
familiar with the boxing world. From what I
Yeah.
have come to understand, he was a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've definitely heard the name. I'm not, as inclined in boxing as we are with wrestling and everything. But I imagine this person had. I think he crushed the role. He like at no point did you think this was an actor playing a boxer. So as long as you have that, I think it went out, with a bang.
Kind of the sad thing is that Antonio Tarver never was in another he was never in another movie again. This was like his one and done. And I mean, it's kind of sad, but I mean, clearly like he was like he showed up, he was awesome, and then he left. So there's some nobility in that.
Yeah. I think in an alternate universe, and this is I'm really going off the reservation here, but if they wanted to start the Creed stuff earlier, let's say they started the Creed concept after Rocky 5, there's a universe where he plays Adonis's son because Michael B. Jordan would have been too young at the time. Like he could have easily pulled off that role, I think.
Oh, that's not a bad idea.
Just an outside theory.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. And I'm glad that we got Michael B. Jordan because he's awesome. But
Yeah.
that's in a different timeline, that definitely would have worked. And really, and just getting down to it, like you said, this movie's 90% personal stuff and then 10% boxing. We do get the montage. Bill Conti comes back to do the classic score. He remixes it a little with some jazz notes, which I think is awesome. We
Mm-hmm.
see we see Rocky running up the steps with a dog this time, chugging back the
Punchy.
eggs, chugging back
Punchy the dog.
chugging back the eggs. They play the hits, and then we get to the fight itself, which I think the fight is really good because what going into this, Rocky's in his 60s, and we're led to believe because Mason Dixon is the heavyweight champion, this should be no contest. But I mean, they play up the fact that Rocky is older, he's slower, but he's also more experienced, and I think the fight is really handled well.
They also play up the fact, and they do this a handful of times. This is just the inherent sport of boxing, which is why it's on life support. in the real world, but they kind of play up the Dixon as somewhat of a paper champion. He's been kind of propped up because they like the image that he is. So it's like it's kind of the rubber meet in the road. It's this guy that physically, obviously, like he can't be older than what his late 20s. I would think this character is supposed to be. So to have that 30 years his junior essentially on the guy, but where one guy was a true world champion and the other guy is maybe at least a little bit fabricated is definitely an interesting concept for a fight. And every Rocky movie, every boxing movie I've ever seen, I always have the same thought in the midst of the battle that if real boxing was half as entertaining, the sport wouldn't be dead like it is, in real life. So is every Rocky movie is just it wrote the blueprint on how to do it. It's why movies like Southpaw and of course Creed later on were ended up being good movies. Even a movie like Warrior, which is more MMA style, they take it all from the Rocky series. Absolutely.
Definitely some Rocky DNA, especially in Warrior, because Warrior is very good. I'll definitely be reviewing that someday.
The Fighter as well, the Mark Wahlberg film. A lot of Rocky DNA in that as well.
Actually have not seen that. I know.
That's a good one. You should, yeah, definitely get on that one. Christian Bale too plays a meth addict. You'll love it.
I'll definitely put that on my watch list, and that'll be a video later
Cheap
on.
plug. We actually reviewed that on my channel, so maybe check that out, everybody, and then see Jake's opinion if he ever gets to that one as well.
Link in the eye. I will make sure that that is up there. But just to put the and one more note, it's funny you bring it up about boxing in the real life. I mean, we've got like YouTubers versus TikTokers boxing nowadays,
Yeah.
and even I'm not even into boxing, and I just look at it and be like, and purists must be just flipping their lids at this.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, we deal with Paul in wrestling space, but like he's not world champion, which is essentially like whatever fake belt the Paul brothers have matters way more than the WBC or whatever it is, the real belt. I couldn't tell you. You could stop 100 people on the street, they can't tell you who the world champion is in boxing right now. I guarantee you nobody's going to tell you. That's how under the radar the sport is.
Yeah, the only other boxing match I've probably seen was Mayweather McGregor, and that was at my local theater. They showed it, and I
Mm-hmm.
got in for free because I was still working there at the time.
Nice.
But story for another time. But just to put the period at the end of the sentence, I still maintain that Rocky Balboa is in contention for the best of the series. I would happily put this up against Rocky 2, which is my personal favorite. It's like this one and Rocky Balboa, and they're like neck and
Yeah.
neck with each other.
I think for me it's tied with Rocky 4 because I think when you say Rocky, you think of the working out in the snow and the hearts on fire, montage and everything. So that's kind of the one you think of, but like once you know the world and you know the characters, like it's hard to not love. We'll call it Rocky 6 here, and that if you need a tiebreaker, I think it's that speech. I think it's the speech that puts it ahead by a nose.
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely getting an amazing grade from me. It's one of the best of the franchise, and this is effectively Rocky's swan song. He would be back in Creed, and I will be talking about that next week. But
Sweet.
this is the last standalone Rocky film, and I think Stallone got exactly what he wanted. Rocky rides off into the sunset. I mean, he does in Creed 2, technically, but in terms of standalone in the series, he gets his Cinderella ending with this. And I love the ending where he visits Adrian's grave and he says one final "Yo, Adrian, we did it." That was wonderful.
The thing that gets me is, the whole universe is centered around boxing, and boxing is about winning or losing. You either have the belt or you don't. But when he's leaving the ring for what, we believe is the final time, and they're giving the scorecards, 10-8 Balboa, 10-8 Dixon, whatever, Dixon wins the fight, but it's such a non factor that you almost have to really listen because the crowd's chanting Rocky. You have to even listen to know that he didn't win because him winning wasn't the issue. It wasn't what he was there to do, really. In maybe the first time ever he got in a ring and didn't really care if he won. So, in a sport that's all about winning and losing, it was like the least important thing when he walks out for the last time.
Yeah, he always wanted to go the distance, and he went the distance again. But what did you all think of Rocky Balboa? Leave your thoughts in the comments. We would love to read what you have to say. Phil, thank you so much for joining me. It was awesome. I got to have you on more. This was a lot of fun. But I will put your channel link in the description. Go give him a subscribe there. I assume he will be reviewing the Super Bowl when it does wrap up. It will be a happy or a sad occasion, depending on what happens. But definitely give him a subscribe there. And like I mentioned, next up on the road to Creed 3 will be my discussion on the first Creed film, directed by Ryan Coogler and starring Michael B. Jordan, who has become the main creative force behind this whole franchise. But if you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, comment your thoughts down below. And if you like this video and you want to see more like it, hit the subscribe button, click the bell to allow notifications. That way when a new video drops, you'll be the first to know about it. My name is Ryan Cam, and I'll see you in the next one.